I'm reading an excerpt from my book, The Everlasting Gospel of Jesus. It's available on Amazon in English, Spanish, or French. It's available on Kindle Unlimited to read for free, or you can buy an ebook for $4.99. I'm reading from chapter 2, Who's Your Daddy? A 2-year period passed when I was not working on this book. I had come to a place where it seemed very difficult for me to continue with it. Following that, I suffered some medical problems and went to the hospital. When I came out of the hospital, after 10 days, I had a lengthy recovery. After some physical therapy, I finally got out and around the house. One morning, God brought to my mind some of my legal writing on an arbitration case I had won years ago when I was still working. God said, I want you to write your book like that. I did not have the writing available to me to look at since I had retired. But I was able to look at the decision in the case, which quoted most of the legal brief I had submitted. As I read the decision, I remembered that the arbitrator had called me and told me I knocked the ball out of the court with that brief. After God spoke to me, I began to work on the book again. A few days later, God spoke to me again saying, David, I want you to tell my story. Many stories have been written, but I want you to write my story. He showed me a vision of the cross, and he told me that was me. Men have presented Jesus Christ in so many ways in commentaries and journals throughout history. As a prisoner to the Romans, the Apostle Paul was the very first person to provide a written record of Jesus Christ in his epistles to the churches. Everything written about Jesus' life was written a long time after his crucifixion. Of course, the Jews wanted to avoid publicity of things concerning Jesus. Pilate and the Romans did too. So it was only through the preaching of the apostles and in-person sharing of Jesus that the story was told. Nonetheless, a great movement came out of those humble beginnings. But Jesus' life, message, and gospel were confined to the people who personally knew him. Those closest to him did not understand much about him. The written record that we have shows us important things about who he was and who he is. At his trial, Jesus told Pontius Pilate that he was born and came into the world to bear witness to the truth. He told everyone who is of the truth, everyone who is of the truth hears his voice. When the Jews told Pilate that Jesus made himself the Son of God, Pilate was terrified. Even so, there was no written record of Jesus' trial until almost a half century after Jesus died. Luke went to Jerusalem to obtain written eyewitness affidavits to present in Paul's defense before Caesar. It appears that even Nicodemus provided written affidavits of the trial for himself and Pontius Pilate, though they have been lost in time. Forasmuch as many have taken in hand to set forth in order a declaration of those things which are most surely believed among us, even as they delivered them unto us, which from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word, it seemed good to me also, having had perfect understanding of all things from the very first, to write unto thee in order, most excellent Theophilus. That's from Luke, verses 1 through 3. The Bible tells us many eyewitnesses who made declarations by hand telling what they believe to be true. There are many declarations of disciples available through the Dead Sea Scrolls and other sources. The Apostle Paul stated that Jesus was seen alive by 500 people at once after his death. Paul had seen statements of synopsis, or statements that Luke provided him for that many people. Nobody accused Paul of exaggeration or falsification of statements in his ministry. Even Peter stated that statements made by Paul were difficult and hard to understand, but still wise, credible, and solid as Scripture. A complete record was available to Luke for Paul's defense, and the testimonies were available to Paul and Luke in their writings. Quite probably, the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were elicited from Luke's investigation. John was also very prolific in providing statements Jesus made about himself and the context in which they were made. Jesus was not uncomfortable speaking about who he was, and eloquently declared who he is to the scribes and Pharisees, and that his credentials were superior to theirs. Jesus was at the height of his fame when he fed the multitude with 2 small fishes. The multitude had followed him because he could heal the sick and cast out demons. They knew that he spoke with authority when he taught, unlike the Pharisees. They believed they could count on what he said. When he performed the miracle of feeding them with 2 small fishes, they thronged him. Peter and Zebedee, the father of James and John, had fishing boats, and they cast out into the Sea of Galilee to escape the throng. Jesus did not go with them, but went another way. He later came to them in the boat, walking on the water. When they reached the other side of the sea, Jesus was not with them on the boat. People were waiting for Jesus on the other side, and when they saw he was not there, they searched for him and found him. The people who were searching for Jesus were Galileans from the part of Israel where Jesus lived. They went to him in the mountain because they heard he could heal diseases and cast out demons. Then, when they heard him speaking, they noted that he spoke as one having authority and not as the scribes. They wondered who he was when he performed a miracle before them, feeding 5,000 men with 5 loaves and 2 small fishes. How had he grown up around them and they never knew what he could do? The Jews were also waiting for him on the other side. Even though they were from Judea and Jerusalem, the Jews knew who he was. Jesus spoke to them all about bread. He told them they only followed him for the loaves and the fishes, but that he was the bread that came down from heaven. The Jews told him their fathers ate manna in the wilderness, and quoted him the scripture that said he gave them bread from heaven to eat. Jesus replied that Moses did not give them bread from heaven. Jesus said he was the bread that came down from heaven, that a man can eat and never hunger. The Jews murmured when they heard him say that, saying, "This is Jesus, whose father and mother we know. How is it that he came down from heaven?" Jesus told them to stop their murmuring. He said their fathers ate the manna in the wilderness and died, but he was speaking of the bread that came down from heaven, that a man can eat and never die. Jesus told them to stop their murmuring. Then Jesus went and taught in the temple in Jerusalem, and the Pharisees were trying to catch him in his words. so they could kill him. But the people heard him teach and believed he was the Messiah. Could the Messiah himself do more miracles than this? There was a division among the people because Jesus was from Galilee and the scriptures said that Messiah would come from Bethlehem.